Hi, whoever's on the other end of this, to whom it may concern. My name's Linda. I'm the founder and shopkeep here at For the Bees, this little corner of the internet. I know I've been absent more and more lately, and there's a reason for that. But to explain that involves telling a bit longer of a story, so I hope you'll bear with me. See, I've found myself at this crossroads, a crossroads I'm quite familiar with because when putting together this story, I realized that I've been here before, a few times, actually. The first of which was right after college when I moved back into my parents' house and back to my hometown of Miami to give up the more practical path I'd been setting up and go into the film industry instead. It was basically an overnight decision catalyzed by a synchronistic moment of sweet serendipity while tipsy in New Orleans. Do you believe in callings? I do, now, and the thing with the calling is you can run from it, you can choose the safe route, but a calling is a calling and it's going to keep calling until you finally pick up that phone. This week is my 1-year anniversary with LA. 1 year since I moved to LA, 12 months of making rent in this city, and that alone I think deserves some form of recognition. I've been thinking a lot about the lost, insecure version of myself who moved here. A chronic people pleaser, serial monogamist who could make anything happen for everyone else, but didn't know what she wanted out of life, didn't see the potential in her that everyone else saw, yet still had this undying, compassless ambition, who so desperately knew she needed to live alone. So when, in the summer of 2020, this business that began as a side hustle grew into something that was vaguely on the edge of seeming like it could maybe support it, I took a leap of faith and signed a lease I wasn't sure I could afford, knowing that between sink or swim, I was giving myself no choice but to swim. Honestly, I don't even think I chose the 100-year-old Art Deco dream of an apartment that I landed in. I think she chose me. They say there's an energy vortex in Hollywood, and after all that's happened this past year, I'd have to agree. Between the sticker in my fridge when I moved in that said For the Bee and my randomly assigned Wi-Fi password being Jazz Reward 305, among many, many other synchronicities, I've had no choice but to accept that fate really does intervene when we're moving in the direction that's most aligned for us, even if we don't know that that's what we're doing. Contrast creates clarity, I suppose, but it's wild to think about what an entirely different world it felt like I was living in. Honestly, the only place I used to really feel like myself was on set. I just kind of came alive in a different way, and I remember telling a friend once how I wished I could be the person I was on set all the time. But that's the problem with living outside of yourself. You require external circumstances, places, people to bring to life the parts of you that you love most. When 2021 started, I was just a stressed out, miserable mess. I was always in a place of assuming I wasn't doing enough, that any day now I would do something to fuck it up and ruin the opportunity I'd been given. I didn't know how to identify my emotions at the time, but I think deep down I just didn't feel like I deserved this life, didn't feel like I deserved this apartment, that it must have been some mistake or trickery that got me here, that no one cared what I had to say or what I posted. I won't go too into detail here, just tell you that every day was mental warfare. My mind's preferred extreme stress response is dissociation, and that's what kicked in at some point. It was like living in an out-of-body experience, like the feeling right before you faint, that tunnel vision, except all the time. Deciding to start making reels brought me back in the direction of the first hints of that person I actually wanted to be, but at the same time made the situation for the person I was even worse. Anxiety would build every time I was in front of a camera until it became a regular interruption and kept me from shooting at all, which is funny considering how happy I probably seemed in all of them. But behind the scenes there was this overwhelming dread and self-consciousness, this feeling of being watched, of being stalked like prey. And it only got worse as the reels reached a wider and wider audience. Reading positive feedback became excruciating, I guess from a psychological standpoint, because my view of myself was so drastically in combat with what compliments were saying. And one day bad became worse when one particular reel ripped the band-aid right off what I was ignoring. It blew up suddenly, and something about being seen by 40,000 people broke the anxiety into full-blown panic, like clawing desperately at the floor, struggling to breathe, trying to hide, trying to give myself any sense of security. After a week of hiding in my apartment, unable to make sense of my thoughts and scared to get in my car for fear of impulsively hurting myself, I called a friend. A simple and obvious thing, but for me, getting myself to reach out to people to willingly step into vulnerability had always been impossible. Talking about emotions used to be impossible. Crying used to be impossible. So you can see why reading these words so comfortably and posting this video with a noticeable absence of that fear now is such a big deal. Just, it feels good to see progress. After that night, for the first time in my life, I started taking my relationship with myself seriously. I signed up for therapy, dug deep, and let go of the things that were making me afraid of being seen. I started EFT tapping to get into the less obvious bits. I started meditating, I continued meditating. I tried new things to pursue the buried parts of myself that I wanted to revive. I spent weeks on end, completely alone, mastering introspection as the art form that it is. I had my soul split open at Kundalini Yoga. I found peace and received guidance through an old cemetery with the most incredible uplifting energy. I followed my intuition off on the road, getting lost and finding myself, or a new favorite spot to watch the sunset along the way. I figured out what inspired me, what drained me, unapologetically released what and who held me back. I learned that self-care isn't always baths and blowing off the world, that sometimes it means budgeting and doing the dishes that night to get to wake up to a clean sink. I discovered a love for cooking and learned that maybe my reluctance to do nice things for myself had less to do with my relationship status and more to do with my inability to receive love. I hit rock bottom over and over and over again until finally I chose me. Until finally I realized that as I worried so much about being someone everyone else would agree with, I was forgetting the validity of my own personhood in the process. As in, I realized that it felt just as good, if not better, to feel chosen by the one person I wanted validation from the most. Myself. I know the whole self-love thing can be such a cheesy buzzword, but I read somewhere once that everything we do is either an expression of love or a request to receive love. I would modify that by saying everything we do is either an act born of self-love or a need for more self-love. And remember that calling we talked about earlier? Well, the thing with the self-discovery journey is the deeper into it you go, the more impossible it becomes to ignore that calling. Because it's an intrinsic part of who you are, and as you run from the calling, you're running from yourself. Just like as you return to yourself, you have no choice but to return to that calling. And after a casual yet life-affirming book recommendation, a synchronistic late-night conversation in Dominica, and a long drive up the coast of California for some quality thinking time, I'm finally ready to stop running and answer that call.
If there's one overarching lesson that I've learned this year, it's internalizing the fact that letting go is far more important than receiving. I'm so immensely proud of this company, but at the same time it feels like it's served its purpose in my life, you know, and I'm confident that releasing stagnant energy makes room for something better to come in. So the time's come for me to walk away from this endeavor, to let go and let flow, as they say. I'm actually being called to YouTube next, and I'm really excited about it, to just talk about the magical realism of everyday life, including many stories and synchronicities that happened over the last year. Just expanding more on the power of self-discovery and helping others navigate their own self-discovery journey from the intersection of spirituality and psychology. And finally spending time working on the movie scripts I've been neglecting for far too long. I'll still be on the gram, but over on my personal account instead. It'll be a slow closeout process while I sell the remaining inventory and assorted business goods, so this isn't goodbye yet, but I just need you to know how grateful I am. Had it not been for the people who supported this account, I probably would have never ended up where I ended up, and I probably would have never gone down the rabbit hole that I went down, and I wouldn't be the person I am now. Thank you. Thank you for guiding me back to me. and I'll see you on the other side.
And if I see a sign in the sky tonight, no one's gonna